I haven't done this before, so we're going to have to test it out and see if it works. The rough plan is to play back the trailer for Ex Machina and try and pick out some key elements from the visuals to help us plan, I guess, an audio story to kind of go along with it. I'm going to play it back without sounds, which might be a bit weird at first, and just make some notes about the sort of key visual elements, the pacing of the video, the art style, and then just kind of mess around, try and experiment with some sounds to obviously accompany that and hopefully enrich it. I'll give it one playthrough and then kind of go back through and see what we can pick out. Not a ton to start with. So it's all kind of neutral in the beginning from the looks of it. Fairly slow pace, doesn't really give much away. Quite a lot of mystery to it. Not a lot of change in pace either, fairly steady going. So quite a sharp change of pace at 120. More intense colours. Doesn't really tell you anything. And I've seen the film a couple of years ago. I don't really remember the soundtrack, but it's kind of an unusual trailer in that sense. Obviously with the dialogue you're going to get a lot more, but usually there's a much stronger visual theme. But there's plenty in there. So we've got the two fade-ins and fade-outs, sort of 3 seconds each. What I'm thinking of doing is just timing some kind of eerie sounds with that. The rest of it is really surprisingly neutral. To say how the film plays out, I guess this part here is a little bit uncomfortable in the sense that he's getting locked in to somewhere. So I'm going to note that down as well. That's a possible kind of point of tension in the music we can use at 21 seconds. Almost all of the rest of the trailer is him kind of picking up clues. So we're going to have to figure out somehow how to use the music. I guess maybe just some kind of gradual build, which sounds obvious because that's how most music works. But in this case, maybe just in a more complex way than usual to kind of layer it up bit by bit. Maybe using some sound effects as well as typical instruments to kind of make something a bit stranger. So this is kind of the hard bit, starting from nothing. So the fade-in's about 3 seconds each. I think that's probably the best thing to do to begin with. So what I'm going to do first is load up a digital synth. I'm going to try and save time and basically start this based on some presets within this synth. There's a ton of stuff here. We'll definitely do some customization. First thing I'm going to do is just run through a few bass presets. I think typical with a lot of film trailers, the kind of initial tension builds come from that kind of low end. You can definitely use horns in there as well, which we might try after this. But to begin with, we just want to get something down. I mean, that's along the right lines of a sort of minimal low frequency sound. On its own, it can be somewhat tense. It's a little bit boring though, it's a bit dull. That's pretty cool. I think I'm going to go with this one. Just going to try and play with a few of these settings. A high pass filter essentially strips out the low end. So for this one, that's the opposite of what we want. But what we might do is layer up a couple of these bass instruments. And if we apply a high pass filter to one of them, then we can use the first one for the bass and the second one for the high end, add some crunch. Can definitely use that, and what we can do with these as well is something called automation, which essentially changes these settings as time moves within the project. First of all, what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to hide that window, is I'm assigning this bass to a mixer track first of all. What the mixer track does is it allows us to add different effects onto a group of instruments, and on the right hand side over here is what we can use to add all the different effects, so reverb, delay, distortion, all that kind of thing. This is a pretty cool tool. It allows you to sort of visualize the type of room that you're trying to emulate the reverb for. So we want quite a lot of reverb, so we want a spacious room. Decay is how long the reverb tail lasts for. So the quickest way to obviously demonstrate that is just to play it through. I think the decay is actually pretty good, so we'll leave that on, and I'm going to add some automation, which I mentioned a second ago, which is going to allow us to dip the volume down as time progresses. So this is how it works essentially. You get this chart, which is percentage over time. So this default line here is showing us the percentage of volume, which does correlate to decibels. And what this allows us to do is change the volume as the bar progresses essentially. So we can right click to add points into here. And what I'm going to do is just make sure that as that bar progresses and we get closer to the second iteration, I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the volume dips and then rises again as we get to the next one. So I'm going to make sure that the not dipping that much. I'm going to drag it lower. Hopefully you can hear how that's dropping down. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this synth that we had there, and we're going to use the same note, but we're going to increase this high pass filter and increase the repeat setting. I might even bump the note up an octave actually. So I have the same note but 1 octave higher. Kind of just testing out really, just to see how things sound. And I'm going to do kind of the same thing I was suggesting a second ago, which is just apply some EQ. This allows me to change the frequencies of any instrument essentially. So if I play this back, you'll see a visual representation of the frequencies that this particular sound is occupying. So we know that with the intro bass, the first bass we were using, we've got quite a lot of low end in there, which is going to be showed on the left hand side. So what we want to do is just dip some of that out and probably raise some of the other frequencies as well. So we get kind of a crispier sound. And we're going to just chuck a ton of reverb on that too. This might not sound great at first, but let's see. So it's kind of got that effect that we were going for, I think. If we just pop the trailer back on for a second. So that kind of fits as a rough starting to it. Okay, so this is where we get to the action. About 20 seconds in. I might actually have to do a bit of composition because this is a trailer that doesn't really provide much else. Definitely on that third fade in, I think we need to add something new. Potentially some low strings or something like that. So let's have a look for some orchestral stuff. I can show you briefly something interesting you can do. This is a different synth. At the top left, what we're seeing here is kind of a visual representation of the waveform. So that's in 2D. What we can do is change that to 3D. And it's kind of a way of adding, I guess, more dynamic style to a particular sound. So if I just play this now, that's obviously not very interesting. As a one-off, it sounds fine, but over time, it doesn't really give much to the listener. What we can do is cycle through that. Maybe we'll use that later on because that's pretty cool. So we can automate that as well so that through the timeline, it'll kind of cycle through these different waveforms that you can see on this 3D chart. So that's the kind of thing that we can add in maybe a bit later in the trailer when things are getting more intense. And once you've got kind of other things like, for example, a bit of reverb, try and find some heavy distortion. When you're cycling through this kind of stuff. Sorry if that's a bit loud. You can get some really cool kind of digital sounds. Anyway, what was I doing? Right, yeah, we're going to add some strings in to try and kind of bump things up from this third fade in. Scary strings. See, this is an example of a digital instrument that's more sensibly named. I can quickly just demo these. So that would probably be pretty cool on top of the bass in the intro potentially. And that's got a nice build over time as well. That seems like a no-brainer to me, but maybe we'll go higher. It's kind of nice. I'm just going to plonk that straight in. Technical word, plonk. I think we could layer that up even again for that fourth fade in even. And I've got a cool idea for what we can try after that too. I'm pretty sure I've put those strings in a different key, which kind of works for this type of trailer, but I think I'm going to have a go at just matching them. I think it's an F. So this is kind of the easy part with sounds like that. It does a lot of the work for you. The tricky bit and the difficulty does come in keeping it interesting, even just for 2 minutes. So let's try and get something for this fourth fade in. And again, in the trailer, this is really before anything's happened. So we don't want to go too crazy. I've got an idea of what we can do. We can do kind of some horn swells, which if you don't know what they are, you'll know it as soon as you hear it, pretty much. So we've got different instruments with different swells, tenor trombone, for example. So you can see it kind of builds in to a peak and has a really nice reverb roll off as well. definitely going to throw one of those in and see how that sounds. Probably worth timing it as well. I'm not sure with what yet, so I'm just going to throw it in and see how it plays against the visuals. Again, as you can probably see, a lot of it is just trial and error really, just to see what fits. That works pretty well, I think. So I think that horn swell does actually add quite a lot. The next part of my notes after that 21-second room closing is 35 seconds with the zoom, I think where he's holding, I guess it's one of the prototype heads. I think we just need something that isn't as constant. Everything so far is kind of just like straight going. We need something that's a bit more kind of fluttery, arpeggiated. So we can try some other orchestral stuff. I haven't used this one a ton, but it uses real recordings to kind of emulate live playback. They typically don't sound supernatural when you program them in this way, but quite often that works quite well. So what we can do with these settings, I'll turn the volume up, is change the pace with which it's played. So I'm thinking of something like that combined with an electronic arpeggiated sound with a similar or different rhythm, but at least with some pace. I think that's probably a bit too fast, but that's going to be a really good option as the trailer progresses to kind of start speeding things up. So let's definitely just kind of throw that in and see what happens. And we'll move that over to the right-hand side. Depending on what you're listening to this on, you might not hear the kind of stereo changes that much. But if I do that, for example, even on a laptop, you'd probably hear it move over to the right-hand side. But what I want to do in reality is just do that quite a subtle way so that it's more on the right than on the left. And again, just to help split them out so that there's a bit more of a balance and it just sounds more interesting when it's being played back. So we'll plop that in here. Sounds better. It's almost being overshadowed by those other strings though, so we can try, if it's possible, to just move this up an octave. Play that one more time just to get the volume right for these high strings. Roughly right. I think that's okay. So then what we wanted to do was 35 seconds, which is when we get the kind of reveal of the first, what I'm assuming was the prototype. Here we get the reveal, that bit there. That is quite a way away from the introduction of these other strings. So what I will do, like I was suggesting before, was add in, I think, kind of an electronic sound, and I'll pan that to the opposite side to the high strings that we've just added in. And hopefully that'll create something kind of interesting as we approach that next focal point of the trailer. What we could do for the other kind of high sound is just try and use the synth that I showed earlier for those really kind of gritty textural sounds. Use this potentially. So there's a few cool things we can do. One thing I think would be good to do is just to automate the volume so that we can try and recreate the rhythm that we've got with the strings. So we can use this LFO here, which is low frequency oscillator. If I drag that over to the volume knob, then we can use that to kind of dictate the rate with which the volume goes up and down. It's probably roughly okay just to begin with. And then I'm going to use another LFO to cycle through the wavetable. So again, I can drag that straight over here. And if I play that back, you'll see that this is kind of moving as it goes. That's a bit too fast. Even slower than that. I think we can try and use that potentially. It doesn't sound particularly great on its own, but I think we can try it with everything else and just see how it fits in. Can add in, which is quite common in soundtracks like this as well, is kind of a big heavily reverberated kick drum, because we haven't got any percussion in yet. So all the rhythm is coming in from the instrumentation, from the strings. So what I'm going to do is just find a kick drum sample. Maybe that with a ton of reverb again. It kind of just has a huge echo chamber effect, and we want this one to be predominantly bassy. So we're going to do the opposite of what we've done with some of the other ones. take the high end off. So you probably recognize that kind of sound from a lot of different film trailers. Quite often there'll be a build and then you'll hear that sound and there'll just be like an open scene or something. So there's a couple of places where we could add that. One is where the door closes, and then another one as the start of the layering things up when this appears. So let's see what we've got, I think. Probably a good point just to recap. If the trailer cut there, I think it'd be like fairly good. Definitely some improvements to make. Yeah, I think you could even layer up that last section a bit more. If we were to keep that last part where that big kick drum silences everything else, which I think it should do, probably a good time to ramp up all of the other elements and maybe even add in something else. I'm going to make one last tweak. One thing I'm going to try first is just to add in another string section. Just maybe like a cello or something. So that's what we've got with the violin. The same pace, I mean, but a different note. So what I'm thinking we can do is use this with a faster pace, but automate the volume so that it kind of curves in. This might be the last part that we need. So I'm going to make an automation clip for this, and we're going to ramp it up from 0 just to meet with the drop of this big kick. We don't yet know if the overall volume's correct, so we're just going to have to test it. But you should be able to hear that slowly fading in, that's the intent. Hopefully. I think it's too low. It was also a bit quiet, but let's just test that again. I need to just change this. Here we go. And then we want to put something in to stop it as soon as that kick hits. I think that works pretty well. What do you reckon? Yeah, if that was just a fade to black, I think that'd be quite a nice little build. There's definitely work you could do to tidy this up. There's a ton of work you could do on the sound design that we've kind of briefly looked at, just to kind of tweak the texture of some of these sounds, like the robotic sound, for example. You could add in a bit more variation if you wanted to. Definitely this part I think could be better. But it works pretty well with the timing. I'm pretty happy with that. So I think we'll probably leave it there then. That was how much music? 35 seconds? Not too bad. Kind of does the job. I don't know if I'll come back to this one or not, but definitely maybe pick out a few more, maybe based on the trailer next time. So if you've got any suggestions of cool trailers that you know of that would be good to make some for, then definitely drop some links my way and I'll have a go at those for sure. Likewise, if you've got any questions about what I've been doing, as always, feel free. Happy to answer stuff or go into more detail next time if it was interesting. And yeah, I'll leave it there.